Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Breakthrough to Best Self with Holly and Lauren-Aaliyah. And as always, we're always happy to be here with you today. Happiness, is that an emotion? Maybe so. Today, we're going to take a dive into emotions and what does it mean to process emotions? Have you ever suppressed your emotions? And how does it actually affect us physically, mentally, emotionally? So, I got a question for all of us. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by emotions but had no idea what to do with them? You're not alone. We all have. We all have. So, welcome, Lauren, my colleague and co host and friend. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Lovely to be with you from South Africa. Good to be with you all. Thanks for those that are watching and joining us for the first time. We hope you'll enjoy this video, but we hope you'll come back and visit with us again. Holly, an interesting one this week, emotions, something we all feel. Can tell you I had a lot of difficulty naming emotions. I don't know about you. I think
Yeah.
back to just just as a child growing up, and we felt emotions, we expressed emotions freely. I guess as children we certainly knew how to show we sad or unhappy or angry or sleepy, or all the things, frustrated and joyful. I don't know, and then something happens after a while, right? Young children are very expressive and show emotions openly and freely, and I almost recall a point at which, and I feel like it was, becoming a teenager and a young girl, and suddenly knowing, I don't know how I knew, but knowing that it was not okay or it wasn't safe to express all of my emotions all of the time. And so we kind of learned to curb our
Yeah.
emotions and pull them in a little. But before we even get into what masking emotions looks like, Holly, tell me whether you were ever taught about emotions and how to even name them, let alone process them. What emotions did you experience as a young child?
Yes, I wasn't truly allowed. It wasn't that I wasn't allowed, but I feel like just my family in general, no one previous to me had even been taught to explore their emotions, let alone name their emotions. And then I will say that my experience when I went off to school, same thing. The educators, that wasn't their primary goal. They wanted us to learn mathematics and English and science. Nobody ever showed us what are our emotions, name our emotions. We talk about the emotion wheel that we work with our clients, but I had no idea there was that much of a range. My range was this: anger, fear, sadness, and happiness of some sort. Four.
Right.
And you and I have looked
Yeah.
at the emotion wheel. There's possibly hundreds when you talk
Hundreds.
about the nuances.
Hundreds. Yeah, hundreds. And it's so funny. And I don't know if that's something we have in common. And maybe we can ask those that are listening to this podcast or watching the video whether, did how many emotions could you name as a young person? And whether it was, in early childhood or even later. I think about myself
Yeah.
even as a teenager. And it's so funny because those you mentioned were probably my four. In fact, I don't even think I knew fear. I didn't know fear till later. Mine was anger. So I didn't know that I would mask fear with anger. I would mask fear uh, with, I knew sad because I knew grief. Even as a young child, I knew grief. My little brother, who was 4 years old when I was 8, he passed away, and it was I was a very young 8 year old figuring out what real true grief and sadness felt like. So I knew that emotion, and it never left me. And I knew happy, because happy was one I could do easily. You put a smile on
Yeah.
your face, and you know, I was a, I was an entertainer as a little girl, Holly. I don't know if you know that about me. I loved to sing and dance. I don't know that could sing, but I know I could dance. Um, and so I did a lot of performing, happy performing. So I knew how to play happy. Let me put it that way. I knew how to play happy.
Mm.
And so there was happy, there was sad, there was angry. Oh, a lot of angry. Angry followed me deep into my 20s and 30s. Happy, sad, and angry were my main emotions. I didn't learn fear till much later. Um, and then the other one, my go-to was fine. How are you doing? I'm fine. How's everything? Just fine. Everything was fine. I'm fine. I learned, and I mean, I don't know if that's part of kind of your colloquial language in that part of the world,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a
Oh yeah.
very common response. Yeah. How are you doing today? Oh, I'm fine. I'm
Fine.
fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Everything's okay. So masking language was how I described emotions. And then, of course, happy, sad, and angry. But Holly, let's talk about masking emotions a little bit more. Having this limited way, first of all, of naming emotions, clearly we weren't able to get down to processing. And we're going to talk about processing a little bit later on in the chat. But just for now, in the absence of naming your emotions, clearly in the absence of processing them, what did masking emotions or suppressing emotions look like for you? How did you deal with your emotions? And until how long ago were you still doing that? Maybe we cover that question too.
You see me smile and laugh a little bit when you say, how did I deal with my emotions? I didn't. I did not.
Right.
What I did is I made them go away. I made them go away by numbing myself out with food, television, sometimes, combination of food and television, just go away. Um, Other substances, shopping, um, lots of relationships, just anything to take me away from any kind of discomfort, especially the uncomfortable. I could experience happiness, no prob, but anything uncomfortable pops up, let's make that go away. Let's make that go away. Because I didn't, no one ever said, hey, you know what? You can process this emotion and experience relief from it. So, and how old was I? Well, I'm what I like to refer to as a late bloomer. So I didn't start processing my emotions until I was 50. I'm 56 now. I
Right.
will say that maybe became more in touch with them in my, mid 40s. But there were decades of just not even approaching, not even looking at it. What
Yeah.
about you, Lauren?
Very, very similar scenario. I mean, spent just decades numbing emotions, not wanting to feel uncomfortable emotions. Like you said, no problem with happiness and joy and the rest of it.
Right.
But discomfort meant I didn't want to feel them. I also thought I was getting rid of them, but I wasn't. It was just storing them. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Um, I just knew I didn't want to feel them. And, also just over socializing was my late teens, early 20s, just never wanting to be alone ever, because dare I be alone and feel something. So just lots and lots of friends, lots of socializing, just
Hmm.
over socializing, and just
Yes.
no quiet time, no me time. Um, in my late teens, early 20s, there was alcohol. Um, there was smoking cigarettes as a way to kind of relax and unwind, I thought. Um, and there was already the food. There was already the food. And then as I went later in life, the partying stopped, the alcohol stopped, the food got worse. The food got a lot worse through my 30s, through my 40s. Um, and then in my late 40s, I would say, 15, 17 years ago, I had a spiritual encounter that led me to self reflection for the first time in my entire life. And that was the first time I started to be a little bit more introspective, become a little bit more aware of discomfort, and try to deal with it in a different way. Um, except I was deep into the food and not knowing that food was a coping mechanism for me, for big emotions. So definitely still not processing them, but just being more aware of them. But I would
Yes.
say my journey of sort of self reflection and kind of being aware of myself and what I'm feeling, um, probably started about 17 years ago. But emotional processing in the way we'll discuss it in a moment, that definitely came a lot later. What were the consequences for you personally, Holly, of avoiding those emotions? I mean, I've mentioned obviously what I now know to be food addiction that I'm in recovery for, thankfully. And all of the consequences for me, the health consequences that came, including, chronic anxiety and panic attacks and autoimmune skin condition that I continue to have to be really careful of. Um, just constantly stressed because I'm not dealing with those emotions. And I mentioned anger, just feeling a lot of anger and rage a lot of the time and not knowing where to go with that, which led to a lot of difficulties in relationships, because I didn't always know how to temper my communication with people. I was very short tempered and very quick to anger. And so it would make people have to pussyfoot around me. Um,
Right.
and so there was just, these were some of the rippling effects. Anything you want to mention before we move on to what the science shows about suppressing emotions, but just some of your personal experiences of suppressing your emotions, Halls?
Yeah, it led to, again, we were talking about, my go-to was the food as well. I went to the food and other to cope. And so that led to um, health issues in my body. It led to some shame. So the shame shows up because I'm going to the food, my body is changing. Um, I have no way of dealing with the underlying emotions that caused me to go to the food, and then more negative emotions show up. It's a pile-on effect. My body changed. I did come down with autoimmune thyroid, and also some other conditions. And I will say that in my 20s and 30s and the beginning of my 40s, I lived in the morbidly obese category, if you categorize, weight and BMI. So it was a cascade effect that, for me, I believe started. Well, there's a couple of things that happened, but one of the things that helped this, manifest to the negative for me was using the food as a coping mechanism. It really
Yeah.
set up a lot of other things, like illness, like isolation. Now I want to isolate myself because I feel ashamed. Just it really led to a whole lot of other behaviors.
Yeah. Well, let's look at what does some of the research say. Because, Holly and I on this podcast, we love to bring you some of the science, the research, so that we're having these conversations with that context in mind. Because, yeah, we may be aware of some of this, and some of it, Holly, you've kind of covered in just the way you spoke about how you have that knock-on effect of shame and not dealing with our emotions actually leads to stress. I mentioned being so highly stressed and angry. So here's what the research says about a chronic stress response, unprocessed emotions actually activating our body's stress response, right? Leading to high levels of, stress hormones. So when we're in this constant state of fight or flight mode, which is that high stress state of mind, state of body, it actually makes us more susceptible to illness. So you and I have spoken about some of the autoimmune responses that we've had. And I know for many people, and we'll talk about, at least 5 different ways that suppressed emotions can affect our health and well-being. But just from a stress perspective, a study published in the Psychomatic Medicine Journal found that individuals with higher levels of positive emotional styles had lower risk of developing the common cold. Just something as simple as the common cold, which and you think about the cold, right? And I think about myself, once a year, I would get seasonal flu, like clockwork. Like there wasn't a winter in South Africa that I wasn't down for 3 to 4 days with raging fever, flu-like symptoms, and at least 2 or 3 common colds throughout the year. And I say that now, not remembering when last I had a cold. Now,
Yes.
touch wood, I've definitely had the flu. I've gotten sick. But I think about how often
Often.
we get a cold that it was called the common cold. How much of that might have been in relation to suppressed emotions, considering that there's this direct correlation? Okay. So what you got, Holly? You got another study for
All
us.
right.
What's another impact on physical health?
Well, let's think about the physical health. Let's think about how we're talking about these, holding back the emotions, keeping them in. That's a little bit of a work when you think about when you're pushing things down. I used to actually swallow. I remember swallowing, literally, when I was feeling an uncomfortable emotion. Do you know that that can actually strain our heart, weaken our immune system? And you were just talking about how often before emotional processing and stress management, how often you fell ill and how often you do now. It's a direct knockoff effect. Here's the research. Research indicates that individuals who habitually suppress their emotions may experience increased heart rates and other cardiovascular problems. I feel my heart rates. When I try to push it down, I can feel my heart rate, my blood pressure increase. I can literally feel it in my body. What else do we have,
Right.
Lauren?
I was talking about anger as one of the hundreds of emotions on the emotion wheel, and just thinking about being angry. And, again, for as long as I've been in the past few years, being a person who practices emotional self-care, emotional processing, stress management, um, I don't have those levels of anger. And as a result, I don't feel that palpitations in my chest and that raised kind of heart rate and blood pressure. So let's talk about mental health, okay? So keeping our emotions bottled up, which I guess we can almost all think about in some way or the other, can lead to increased feelings of anxiety and even depression. So over time, and so we're not just talking about, okay, in a moment, I really feel this particular emotion and I feel really stressed about it for today and I feel really anxious. So we use the word anxious in that regard, where we feel anxious. So we're really using the word anxiety in that instance to describe an emotion. I feel anxious. Here I'm talking about long-term chronic effect of suppressing emotion can lead to a mental health diagnosis of anxiety. Now we're talking about chronic anxiety, not passing feelings of anxiety, feeling anxious, and then I don't feel anxious anymore. It's resolved and I'm fine. We're talking about somebody like me who ended up on medication for chronic anxiety at some point. I had bouts of depression, thankfully, not to the extent that I needed to be medicated. But I remember swinging between anxiety and depression. And I've always described it like this: depression would make me not want to get out of bed in the morning. But laying in the bed, deeply depressed and knowing I didn't want to get out and face the world. Anxiety would make me panic about all the things I wasn't doing because I was laying in the bed. and the feeling like a prisoner stuck between anxiety and depression. And this is what we're talking about as a chronic mental health effect. And this a study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals who regularly suppress their emotions reported lower levels of well-being and higher levels of depressive symptoms. So here we've got, emotional suppression really being directly associated with high levels of anxiety, depression, and just overall our psychological feelings of distress or calm will be affected by the levels at which or to the degree to which we are processing our emotions. Holly, what else have you got in terms of the research?
Well, let's also talk about trauma storage. Let's talk about how trauma isn't just in our minds, but our bodies can physically hold on to these painful experiences. And this also affects our physical well being. So, if you think about unprocessed emotional trauma and how it can manifest physically, think about our nervous system and how our nervous system can be activated. It can be activated. And so, the study comes from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score. A lot of people are very aware of this book, and it's been so helpful for the communities that you and I have worked with.
Yeah.
But they can become physically embedded in our bodies, and it can impact our nervous system, our health, our well-being. Some of the work that I do here locally, I do some energy work that helps release some of that stored trauma in our body. That trauma could be stored for decades.
Yeah.
And and we can take time, we can be very loving and kind and gentle with ourselves as we work to release some of that stored trauma.
And that makes complete sense. And I love the title of that book, Dr. Van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, because, and as you were explaining, Holly, the nervous system is really that correlation between the mind and the body, messages being carried from the mind throughout the entire body via the nervous system. So if we are sitting with these, and we're going to get to, what processing emotions looks like, and we're going to see that it's actually related to thoughts and what's going on in the mind. Quite often our emotions are being stimulated by what's going on in the mind. And so if our mind is having this trauma response or this trauma effect, that's being taken to every cell in our bodies via the nervous system. And so it's no
Yes.
wonder that negative emotion can directly lead to physical illness. Right. So here's a final one that was a shocker to me to come across. Trauma, which you were talking about, trauma, a traumatic response, capital T trauma or little t trauma, meaning
Right.
these events or these episodes that lead to these big uncomfortable emotions. Trauma can cause changes in how our genes work, our genetics. And so
Wow.
that means that our trauma or our trauma responses can actually be passed down to our children and affect the way that their stress responses work. So, in other words, how they cope with stress, their resilience to stress can be affected by how well I've dealt with my trauma. Isn't that fascinating? There was a study done on survivors of the Holocaust, and it was found that Holocaust survivors' children, found epigenetic changes in their genes, in their genetic manifestations or representations based purely on the regulating of a stress response. And the study found that, of course, these findings were that trauma can affect gene expression in subsequent generations. Isn't that fascinating and frightening at the same
Yeah,
time?
right.
Like
It
that, I did
is.
not know. I mean, even in the last couple of years that you and I have been doing, deep emotional processing work, I've obviously known about the physical and emotional and mental effects. But to be honest, researching for this podcast was the first time that I came across, that it actually affected gene expression. So, Hals, let's talk about we've been talking about emotional processing the whole way through. But really, what is a simple definition, if you like, of emotional processing? What does that mean?
Yeah, so processing our emotions simply means just acknowledging them, feeling them, moving through them instead of the description we were talking earlier, instead of pushing them down, suppressing them, masking them, we're allowing ourselves to experience them so that we can move through them. But at first, the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that they're there, even there, or what they are.
Right.
So what does it start with? It starts with awareness. What does that mean to you, Lauren?
Well, awareness, I guess, is just noticing, and we talk about this a lot in our work where we talk about awareness, just simple awareness is such a big win for self-growth, for healing. Just being aware, noticing when a strong emotion arises. And then you spoke about, earlier on, we were saying we didn't even know how to name it. So when we say naming an emotion, we've mentioned a couple, anger, sadness, fear, and anywhere on the internet you can download an emotion wheel. Just do a Google search of emotion wheel, look for an image of an emotion wheel, download that emotion wheel, and you will be shocked that behind anger is probably another 20 emotions that we just call anger. And behind sadness is another 20 or 30 emotions that we call sadness and fear and so on. So yeah. And then Holly, you spoke about feeling it. Okay. So what does that mean when we feeling the emotion? So we're aware of it, we've named it, and then what are we doing next?
Well, I like to do a bit of exploration at that point. I like to
Okay.
ask myself in a kind, non-judgmental way. I'm not judging where it came from or anything like that. I'm just trying to find out, where did this come from and what may have triggered it. And that's just a simple going in and inquiring into what this is. We've named it. Now, where's it coming from? In such a kind way, not where's this coming from? We don't have to be like that. We can just be like, oh,
Yeah.
I wonder where this is coming from, and I wonder what triggered this. Just like you and I like to
Yeah.
refer to as gentle curiosity. Just being curious
Yep.
and exploring.
Hmm.
And then there's
Yeah.
another piece, Lauren. There's another piece after that. We're talking about the mind-body connection. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's part of that exploring as well. You could see it as part of that. It's also just noticing, where you're physically feeling it. And it's so interesting to me when we do emotional processing work and we ask a client, where do you feel that in your body? I have never, in the years that I'm doing this work, I've never had a client saying, oh, I don't feel it anywhere at all. Not once, not one time, not one client, not one time has ever said, every single time I've asked a client, where do you physically feel that you've just described as an emotion, that anger, that sadness, that fear? They've been able to point it out. Oh, I feel this tightness in my chest when I think about that. I feel my jaw get tight. Oh, I feel my throat close. Oh, I feel it on the top of my head. It feels like, and so different emotions. And this is an important step when we're doing what you called exploration, Holly, when we're doing that kind of feeling, those feelings and acknowledging them, is to really notice that mind body connection, noticing that what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling is not just in my head, but it actually resonates in a part of my body. And it's not just a physical feeling. We now know that this is happening somatically, it's happening on a cellular level based on that research,
Yes.
and quite possibly causing chronic illness and disease. So important at that point to just notice where you're feeling these emotions. So we've done all that, Halls. We're aware of it. We've named it. We've done some exploration. We've asked, where does it come from? We're noticing exactly what it feels like in our body. How do we begin to give expression to this so that we can release it? You called it moving through them rather than suppressing. So rather than suppressing,
Yeah.
we're going to express and release. What are ways that we can express and release emotion?
here comes the beauty of this process. We get to decide which way of releasing works best for us. Like I could
Good.
say, "Hey everybody, journal," and that'll take care of your emotion. Well, some people don't journal. Some people aren't into journaling. Some people are. So there are so many ways of expressing and releasing emotions. So journaling, like I said, talking about it to someone you trust. Breath work, huge.
I just
Moving
want to
our
repeat talking.
bodies.
Sound glitch there for a second. The second
Oh,
one you
okay.
said was talking
Talking
about it,
about
right?
it
So you said
to someone you
talking about it
trust.
to somebody you trust or to a professional. Yeah.
Correct. Breath
Yeah.
work exercises, and there are so many breath work exercises out there. One breath work exercise might resonate with you while another one doesn't. So you could explore the many
Yeah.
aspects of it. Yes, Lauren?
Yeah. We did a podcast on breath work actually. So if you
We
scroll through
did.
this video playlist, you may actually find an entire episode we did on the benefits of breath work. Okay, good. Journaling, talking about it, breath work. What else, Holes?
Moving our bodies, moving our bodies, because we have those stress chemicals that are released during stressful or highly emotional periods, and we can move our bodies to move some of that adrenaline and cortisol out of our bodies. That's a physical way we can do it.
Yeah,
Lauren, you're certified in EFT tapping. Tapping is a wonderful way
that's right.
to engage both our physical, mental, actually all of it, physical, mental, emotional, all together. And
Yep.
there's so many other ways. Lauren and I do emotional processing work when people want to explore limiting beliefs that they have that are causing them to maybe behave in ways that they would prefer not. So there are, getting
Mm.
bringing in a professional to help explore is another way. And there are other trauma release activities that you can find on YouTube. There are so many ways, and it's what resonates with you today. Because next week it might be something else, and it's okay to explore. It's okay to find
Yeah.
many modalities to work through this. So,
Yeah.
Lauren, I wanted to
Holly, I'm
ask you if you go ahead.
sorry, I'm just aware, and I don't know if it's on my side, so I'm just going to apologize to our viewers. There seems to be a pause on either my video or yours, but hopefully the audio is coming through okay and you guys can still hear us. I'm just noticing for the last part of what you were saying, Holly, your video was frozen. But we keep going. Hopefully the audio is coming through loud and clear. I could certainly hear you. Holly, you mentioned so many of those different ways that we can process emotions, and I love that. As just as you said, we can find the ways that resonate best with us. For me, you mentioned, my certification and coaching in EFT, emotional freedom technique. That's what it's called, EFT tapping. A lot of people, refer to tapping, but EFT is it's right there in the name, emotional freedom technique. So I use my go-tos. My first is talking. Can you tell? Talking to people. Yep, that's my first one. Have you met me? Yes, I talk to people. Holly is somebody I talk to a lot. But when I'm on my own and I want to process on my own, meditation, prayer is a way that I sit to. First of all, get space, just calming the height of the emotion, create space for myself. And if it's not immediately accessible or appropriate for me to immediately get into a state of prayer, then just breath work, breathing,
Yes.
simple box breathing will get me
Yeah.
calm. And that takes what I'm going to call the edge. It takes the edge off. This is some of
Yes.
the ways I have learned to not be reactive as I used to be and lose my temper or be short with people. I've learned to pause. And as I say, that kind of a state of prayerfulness or breath work in a quick breathing helps me to just take a pause and then respond appropriately. When I've got a little bit more time or I'm on my own, I may do some tapping. Emotional freedom technique is what it's called. And just notice that a few cycles of tapping can also take the edge off. And then, of course, some deeper emotional deep dive work. I do neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. And so that helps me to deep dive. We've got some wonderful emotional processing exercises that we do, asking pertinent questions. You and I both love the work of the incomparable Byron Katie, who does the work. And I know you work with a lot of your clients doing the work as well, asking important questions, making those connections between thoughts and these emotions. So lots of wonderful ways, Holly. But let's talk as we come to a close on this episode. We spoke about some of the negative impacts of negative emotions or of suppressing emotions. But let's talk about what can we expect if we do begin to start processing emotions. Like, is there an impact on our health? And what have you come across in looking at the research?
Well, this is one of my favorite fields in holistic wellness, which is longevity. We can actually affect the, the length of time we are here on this planet in these bodies. Effectively managing our emotions can lead to a healthier, longer life. Let's talk about the study associated with this. Okay, so this study was published in Applied Psychology, Health and Well-Being, found that individuals with higher subjective well-being had a reduced risk of mortality, suggesting that there is a link between emotional health and longevity. And I can tell you, just I am, feeling calmer, feeling, processing my emotions. My health has gotten better. So, that's just my personal experience, but it's lovely to see that there's actually a study that references this.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
another way, Lauren?
Well, we've mentioned already, we've spoken about how dealing with our emotions can actually boost our immune system. And we saw that when we spoke about the fact that can fight off illness like the common cold and the flu. So definitely good research there as well that suggests that, positive emotional styles, meaning somebody that actually processes and deals with their emotions, moves through them, um, uh, those studies show that there's a greater resistance to illness like colds and flu, so enhancing our immune system. And then, of course, neuroplasticity health. Tell us about the study in the Psychological Science Journal.
Well, yeah, neuroplasticity, changes in the brain, beneficial, enhancing emotional regulation, cognitive functions, all of these positive changes in our brain. I'm like, yeah. So working through our emotions can rewire our brains. You and I have seen that for years now. The study is in psychological science, and it's found that individuals who engaged in mindfulness practices showed an increased gray matter concentration in the brain regions involved with emotional regulation, indicating that emotional processing can lead to positive brain changes. First of all, can I just do this? Mind blown.
Yeah,
Mind
yeah,
blown that can happen. So,
yeah. So it's so interesting because it's like a cycle. The more you process your emotions, the more you grow capacity for emotional control and thinking. Like, and of course, with more emotional control and more thinking, it means you've got more stable emotions. So it's this knock-on effect. If you just start with, as we were saying, those simple ways that you can move through emotions, you actually change your brain's capacity to deal with emotions. And we
wow.
know there are more coming down the pike. I spoke about how emotions like, uncontrolled anger or frustration or resentment can affect relationships. So, no prizes for guessing that research published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships indicated that individuals who effectively process their emotions tend to have better relationships. So, just understanding, managing our emotions, moving through them, can improve our relationships. And of course, if we've got better relationships, it means that's also a reduced number of stressful emotions that are coming through, right? So again, that wonderful knock-on effect. So yeah, I mean, just those are just a few of many, many, many studies, I'm sure, that link emotional processing to, I guess, a greater sense of well-being, as well as like directly affecting our physical and mental health. Charles, as we close out, let's see, what are your closing thoughts on this topic before we say goodbye?
Just that, if suppression has been holding you back, if you've been pushing down your emotions or, trying not to feel your feelings, there's good news. There's great news, actually. You can learn to process them in a healthy way. And as I always say, don't I say this all the time? Your pace at processing your emotions and at getting on board with processing your emotions is perfect for you. There's no, I have to do this by such and such a time or else I've failed. Or I've, processed this one, but I haven't processed that one. It's fine. You do you, friends. You take care of yourself. Lauren and I are big proponents of intuition. You will intuitively know, you will start to recognize when you're ready to take on this next piece, this next emotion. Um, Lauren, what else can you say to close us out?
Yeah, well, just to say, you mentioned earlier, there's a number of ways that we can do this on our own. This process of, acknowledging and being aware and naming. And you mentioned different tools like journaling and breath work, and we've spoken about tapping. But I just, in closing, want to just say that we will include with this video, in the links below this video, you can certainly find assistance from Holly and we work with people around the world navigating big emotions in a healthier way, and working through some of those modalities that we referred to today. So if you're ready to start the journey off, but you're not sure where to start, or you need some help, you want to get somebody to facilitate, please feel free to, just join us below. Otherwise, looking for somebody locally, somebody close to you that can help you as well. Just whatever you do at your pace, as Holly said, we want to make sure that we have those wonderful health benefits and good, healthy, long life, if that's possible. Okay, so thank you so much. That's what we got for you in this episode. It's a little bit longer than some of our others do, but such an important topic. And I'm sure we'll speak about this again, Holt. So, yeah, thanks for joining us. Another breakthrough to best self. We look forward to seeing you in the next video, guys. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. See you next time.